Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And today with me is Joel Burleson-Davis, who is the SVP of Worldwide Engineering for Cybersecurity at Imprivata. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But first, I want to tell me a little bit more, Joel, about the challenges you're seeing for remote and hybrid workforces in regard to cybersecurity more broadly. What are the top three challenges? Can you outline those for me?
Yeah, there's a few different challenges that we keep seeing. One, especially with remote workforce, and the way that it expanded with COVID and the way that it's not going back, even though, most of the world is moving on from the pandemic. Is a fractured set of tools that's really hard to, keep track of what's going on. It was a lot easier when you sort of could implicitly say, hey, this is all inside of my office. I may or may not know what's going on, but my stack is sort of here. When you add variables, to a distributed workforce, now suddenly you're talking about, home networks and, internet and different locations and, the BYO, bring your own device to, already started at work, and it's like even more so, with the remote workforce working from home. And so you have like this, all these new variables that happen, in a lot of security teams, being understaffed pre-pandemic and the explosion of remote workforce, really leveraged implicit security. An implicit trust. Hey, if you're inside of our building and you made it in somehow, great, you're probably fine. Hey, if we gave you a laptop and you're here, you're probably fine. But that same sort of implicit trust, implicit security, although dangerous, right? Even when it was, everybody in an office, becomes even higher risk when the whole workforce is remote. So, I think cybersecurity teams are really struggling with that move then from, because of the explosion of variables, from that move of, creating this sort of security system built a lot on implicit trust, implicit security, to having to be really deterministic about it, having to be really explicit about, what they're doing for their endpoints and their users and their identities. And it takes a lot more work, right? So staffing is a challenge as well.
So tell me a little bit more. You're seeing these challenges, and cybersecurity teams have to decide how much access to give their employees. So tell me a little bit more about how they walk the line between, not having people take an hour to go through the cybersecurity rigmarole and still preventing phishing attacks and ransomware and all of those other problems.
Yeah, access provisioning, especially for especially for onboarding, it was always a challenge. Back in the day, it would be like, hey, nurse started, just copy the permissions that this nurse had for your new account and just like go for it. We don't have to be really thoughtful about the permissions we need because you're inside of our castle and moat. You're sort of doing a similar thing this person is doing, which goes back to a little bit that implicit security, implicit trust. Onboarding a remote employee, you can't necessarily do that, or you shouldn't. You shouldn't have probably done it in the first place. So the first place to start is defining what access roles need, right? Almost everything that anybody's going to do in an enterprise at this point is some sort of identity, right? Some sort of end user, whether it's an employee or non-employee or like, an automated system, needing access to some sort of asset, right? Like data asset or system asset, and understanding what those are and what they do, and then creating sort of explicit, connections between those identities and those assets, and building that list is, that's really the way that you solve that. Even if we return to, working in the office again, full time, and everybody returns to the office, it's still probably what we should have done. And so we should start on that now. To me, this is a big place where the push for zero trust architecture came from. In recent times, people talk about sort of identity as the new perimeter. All of that revolves around this idea that we were sort of sitting in this I don't want to say we were sitting in this comfortable spot of all this implicit trust and security because we had, these captive audiences sort of, or populations inside of, brick and mortar locations, and that sort of broke. And so we're no longer in our little cozy, cubby of implicit security and trust. And, we need to implement the tools and processes and programs to, move to an explicit trust and explicit security sort of setup.
When you're talking about explicit trust and explicit security, that takes quite a lot of resources, because if you're going to be talking about, employees bringing their own device, it's pretty hard to have, zero trust approaches to employees bringing their own device. So tell me a little bit more about how companies are approaching budgeting around these issues, because if they're going to fund everything about that employees have at home, so should companies then just buy all the equipment for employees not only in their work office but in their home office? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so that becomes financially unsustainable for lots of companies. So throwing money at the problem, if you have enough money to do that, to fully fit out every employee's office with all of the gear that's fully managed by an IT staff.
And both for hybrid employees, they need the home office and their work office.
Right. Like if you have those staffing levels and you have that much capital to do that, like have fun. I don't think that's most people. So they're going to have to figure out ways to at least sort of try to get there as much as they can. What we've been seeing for, a lot of our customers and clients is vendor consolidation. It's like, hey, we need lots of different tools from lots of different vendors. Let me consolidate vendors, get bulk discounts, and I can do more with my money. And often sort of a consolidated vendor, sort of a platform company, will also offer you sort of additional value for about the same price. Because they're, you're buying multiple products. You're buying things that are, built to work together and things like that. So, that idea of sort of vendor consolidation, preserving money, right, so that you have additional, budgetary overhead to do other things where you can't solve that, has been one, pretty effective thing that we've seen, across our client base and, our prospects as well.
Now, when you're talking about all these issues, how do you convince the leadership team that this is important to do? Kind of how do you make the case to them if they haven't seen the ransomware hacks going on yet inside their company, that this is an important issue to actually address?
Yeah, that's probably challenge number one for every security team forever. Sort of breaking the apathy that people have towards security, or at least convincing different folks with different priorities that actually cybersecurity should be one of the highest priorities. And it's very difficult, if you have leadership teams that don't have experience or aren't willing to break out of their perspective, it's going to be very difficult to talk to them. Yes, when you tell a CFO that, hey, we can spend 100 grand here, 200 grand here, and help prevent ransomware that might cost us $10 million. If they can't elevate their mindset to say that seems like a good investment to me, and what they're thinking is, hey, that this means I have to spend 200 grand today to prevent this possibility that I may spend some large sum in the future. It's going to be really hard, right? So I think pitching that story and helping elevate people's perspective beyond their sort of domains that they're usually working in is is all we sort of have, unless you happen to be working with a leadership team that's been through breach. And for the customers and prospects and folks that we talk in the industry that have been through a breach, have been through ransomware, and you start talking about, hey, we need to do something for our cybersecurity program, they're like, yeah, no problem. Yeah, totally understand. That's totally worth doing. I've been through that pain already, and from experience, I've learned that, that's something that's worthwhile to invest in. In the good news across the industry, I mean, as we talk to our, customers, as we go to, industry shows and prospects, most people are on board. The market, ahead of us looks a little tight. There's like choppiness in the public markets and all that stuff, but we have not heard a significant amount of pushback from, CIOs and CFOs that they really want to or they're really looking at diminishing their cybersecurity spend because they understand how important it is and how painful it could be, to recover from an incident.
Excellent. Now, tell me a little bit more about what Imprivata does. So you talk about your customers, your clients, and these conversations so that people know more where your expertise is coming from.
Yeah, Imprivata is a digital identity company, and we have a whole portfolio of products around securing and easing, access and control and monitor around digital identity, anywhere from badge tap into systems, single sign-on MFA, privileged access management, AI and machine learning analytics on access logs, through provisioning. Like an IGA, provisioning user accounts, deprovisioning user accounts, provisioning hardware, deprovisioning hardware, things like that. And so it's a full featured digital identity management company.
Excellent. Good. Well, that's been very helpful. As we wrap up the podcast episode, is there anything else that you haven't shared about hybrid work and remote work, cybersecurity, and Imprivata that you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, one of the things I always try to give advice. Almost everybody in cybersecurity is anxiety ridden. Cybersecurity is a really tough place to be in because everything feels at risk. You always feel under-resourced and underwhelmed. And they often ask, where do I start? What do I do? How do I get the biggest bang for my buck? And my advice usually is to start with your riskiest identities and your, highest value, most critical assets, and start building your sort of explicit, trust, explicit security program around those, sort of high risk identities and high value assets as like a kernel of your program, and you can build out from there. It's do I lock my house first or do I lock up my bike first sort of thing. It's like, well, if my bike gets stolen, that's not very fun. But if my house gets broken into, that's really painful, right? So the high value assets, securing them and starting your program of sort of explicit trust, explicit security there, I think is the most useful place to start. And then you can take your learnings from that to build out to, less critical things and less high risk identities.
Excellent. Thank you, Joel. That was very helpful.
No worries.
Excellent. And thank you to the listeners for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Make sure to subscribe to the show wherever you check this out, and please leave a review. It helps us improve the show, and it helps other people discover the show. All right, I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. In the meantime, the wisest and most profitable decisions to you, my friends.